Dear all, we are very excited and happy to have you join our second webinar of this AI webinar series. So a brief intro about Morocco AI and who we are. Morocco AI is an initiative led by AI experts in Morocco and abroad. These experts are professors, researchers, and AI professionals. The mission of Morocco AI is to promote AI growth in Morocco and build a strong collaborative AI community both locally and abroad. We seek to foster excellence in AI education, research, and encourage the innovative spirit. This AI webinar series aims to bring Moroccan AI researchers to present and share their work with the community. For today's webinar, Redwan and I will be your hosts. I will let Redwan introduce himself.
Hi, Iman. Hi, everyone. So my name is Redwan Gensat, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Sorbonne University. My research interests are AI applied to Earth system modeling in general, and I'm very glad to see you all for this second webinar.
Thank you, Redwan. And I am Iman Gryech, PhD student at University Mohammed V and International University of Rabat. I'm working on NLP and its application to understand job market needs. Our first webinar was in NLP and Transformers. If you have not watched it yet, please find the link in the Morocco AI website. Today's webinar is on artificial intelligence for low-cost urban air pollution monitoring by Ihsane Gryech. Ihsane is a Google PhD fellow and PhD candidate at ENSIAS Mohammed V University and the International University of Rabat. She holds a bachelor's in mathematics and informatics from Mohammed V University in Rabat and a master's in big data from the International University of Rabat. Ihsane was a speaker at the AI for Good Global Summit, Falling Walls, and international conferences. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them on the chat on Zoom or YouTube, and we will make sure to ask them when Ihsane poses for questions at the end of the talk. And please be sure to stick around for our networking session right after the presentation, where we will break out in smaller rooms so you get to meet and talk with some of the attendees. Without further ado, Ihsane, please feel free to start when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Iman, and thank you to everyone for joining us here today. So I'm going to present for you AI for urban pollution monitoring. So to start with, basically I'm part of the More Air project, which is a project that started in 2017 and still ongoing to this day. It is funded by the Belgian Ministry of Corporation through the Villiers EOS program under the principal investigators, Professor Mounir Rourou and Professor Sophie Paulin. So this project is actually a good example because it actually can show how AI can be applied to many fields. Since, as you can see, it starts from different axes, from the data acquisition to studying the urban pollution monitoring and to seeing its impact on infants' health. Another aim of the project is to actually share the data with researchers or just people, general public, also to raise awareness about air pollution. So more precisely, with the use of data gathered from several sensors, as you can see here, whether used on transportations or on your bag, to measure air quality, pollutant impacting factors, and by combining IoT, big data, artificial intelligence, and geographical information systems, we can use that to predict air quality, store the data collected, have spatiotemporal forecastings, and make the results visible to the public using geographical information systems. So first things first, why is air pollution so dangerous, or why does it matter, and why did we start the whole thing in the first place? So according to the World Health Organization, 7 million people die each year because of air pollution, and 6 million among them are only children under the age of 15 years old. Only in Africa, dirty air leads to the death of 712,000 Africans each year, which is more than the toll of unsafe water, malnutrition, and unsafe sanitation. In addition to that, there are other diseases that are linked or enhanced by air pollution, such as lung cancer, strokes, heart disease, lung disease. And who suffers from these the most are children, because their respiratory system are not complete yet, and they are much more vulnerable compared to elderly people. Without, of course, mentioning all the effects on the living organisms and the ecosystem. So how is air pollution defined? So you might already know about some of the air pollutants, such as carbon monoxide, a colorless and odorless gas from fireplaces, gas stoves, sulfur dioxide, which is primarily produced from the burning of fossil fuels, coal or oil, NO2, which is very known, mainly emitted by power generation, industrial and traffic sources, and black carbon, which is one of the largest contributors to global warming after CO2, which is formed through the incomplete combustion of fossil fuels, biofuel, and biomass. So what these three pollutants here have in common, and what is the pollutant that is missing on that list? It is particulate matters. So particulate matters actually are somehow the combination of many particles coming from these three pollutants. So particulate matters are the sum of tiny solid and liquid droplets suspended in the air. They are either natural, such as sea salt or sand that you already know about, or man-made sources, or the combination of the other pollutants that I just talked about. So when the level of these particles increases, it penetrates the respiratory system and deep into the lung, and can cause multiple health effects. Because as you can see here, particles are even smaller than human hair. PM 2.5 are smaller than 2.5 microns, and PM 10s are smaller than 10 microns, which makes them easily penetrated into the respiratory system. So because of all of these effects of particulate matters, it is indeed our main concern, and it is the pollutants that we will be using in more air, and the main concern that we are working on. So because of all these pollution problems, it has become a worldwide issue, and everyone is trying their best to solve it. So China, for instance, is spending and still spending hundreds of billions since 2013. But the poorest countries of Asia and Africa and Middle East cannot actually afford such investments. So how does air pollution monitoring goes? So the traditional way is by using monitoring stations. So monitoring stations, however, are extremely expensive. They're huge, and they need a lot of maintenance. So when I say extremely expensive, you can expect at least $10 kilos per station, excluding the installation and maintenance costs. So here in Morocco, we have 31 of those stations. We have 29 fixed stations, as you can see here in the whole country of Morocco, and 2 stations that are mobile. So for the fixed stations, they will often be found in airports. And for mobile stations, they are often used when there is an emergency case, or pollution needs to be measured somewhere. And so that's when they send mobile stations. But again, I insist on the fact that they are very expensive and really hard to maintain. Another way, because of this issue, there is another way to predict air quality, and that way is using pollution forecasting, using whether machine learning or other pollution forecasting methods. So in prior work, forecasting is often based on satellite data, because there is, of course, a lack of data. And however, satellite data generally have a weak spatial resolution. And they also often use linear models. For other like literature work, they use meteorological features as explanatory variables to be more accurate. However, again, when using linear models, it's not very accurate because pollution distribution in the air is not, and the atmosphere is not linear. So what's special about the MoroccoAI project and why, how is our strategy different, is that we first of all use a deployment strategy based on a medical survey. We then use low-cost sensor nodes deployment. We try to cover a very large area. And we take into account every studied area and the various activities and characteristics related to it. And last but not least, we try dealing with the loss of data, which is an issue that almost each data scientist deals with. So for the first part, deployment strategy based on medical data. So this is somehow a bottom-up approach. So instead of finding pollution and seeing its impact on infants' health, we started with the infants' health. We interviewed 420 patients that were admitted to the emergency department here in Rabat at CHU. And we interviewed them from the region of Rabat and its outskirts. So they were asked several questions about their health state, their respiratory state. And of course, they talked about many aspects that are related to their respiratory state. So there is indoor pollution, of course, outdoor pollution, patients' medical background, if their parents, for instance, also had asthma problems or genetic problems, and then psychological and infectious triggers. So we only emphasize on outdoor pollution because it's the one like we are most worried about. And what these patients also pointed out, and that we didn't have in mind before that, is that there are several unusual sources of pollution that we weren't even aware of, and that these patients think that have an impact on their infants' health. So these sources, some you already know about, such as traffic, and traffic is also very known in other countries. They often relate traffic to air pollution. But the ones that we did not know about are open air street food vendors and public baths and public ovens and many more. So this is a case that is like mainly related to Morocco, because it's important to find while building a model, like find how it is related to the exact place where we are working on. So a first step is to recognize the sources of pollutions that are found here in Morocco. So for that, we used sensor nodes, and because these sensor nodes are what will help us find the sources of pollution and then also record air pollution measurements. So this is our air quality sensor node. It was developed in our laboratories here in UIR. And there are two types of sensor nodes. So they both look the same. It's this one that you see here, and this one was deployed in, this is a picture in Agdal. And so there are the nomadic sensor node, which is settled in one specific location that goes from 1 week to several months. It has a better power supply because it is settled in one position. And then there is the mobile sensor node that operates on high capacity batteries but has lower energy autonomy. It says only for 24 hours. So the mobile sensor nodes are used to collect data while on the move to capture local concentrations, variability, and detect hotspots. So why is this sensor node special? I think you remember one of my first slides that said that you can expect at least $10 per station. So ours is only $95, which makes the duplication process of the sensors very affordable. And all complements are available in the market, so you can actually make one yourself. And it is easily assembled. So these sensor nodes were deployed all over the city of Rabat and its outskirts. So far we have deployed it. You can see here, if you are from Rabat, then you will recognize some of these neighborhoods, Agdal, Hayriyad, Yaqub al-Mansour, Taqaddum, and many more. And we made sure to distribute the sensor nodes in many areas to be able to see this variability. So this is an example of PM concentrations for the pneumatic sensor nodes in micrograms per cubic meter recorded in Hain Hada Wahed. The sensor node also captures temperature and humidity as well as PM10 and PM2.5. And this here is PM concentrations for the mobile sensor nodes in micrograms per cubic meter. So here you can see the difference between pneumatic and mobile sensor nodes. For the pneumatic sensor nodes, like the data is more fluid than this for the mobile sensor nodes. You can see that it changes a lot, it varies a lot. And mainly for this neighborhood here, Taqaddum is a neighborhood that compared to Hain Hada Jouj, to Hayriyad and Jurjama, there is a lot of variability. You can see that we can see here a lot of peaks. And these lines here show that pollution actually this is the dangerous level of pollution. It should not go higher than 90 for PM10, and it should not go above 55 for PM2.5. So we wanted to understand why are there these peak values. And we found that for that we need feature inspection to try to understand them more. So what impacts pollution the most is meteorological features such as wind speed and direction that takes pollution from one area to another. It can transport pollution. There is temperature that could lower pollution. There is dew points that could actually trap the pollutants and keep them stagnate for in one place. There is also traffic-related features. These are very known. We know that traffic impacts higher pollution. And there is building features. So buildings, why? Because if you can imagine with me, two very high buildings and a very narrow road between them, then the pollution could stagnate there and stay there for a very long time. And then there are geographical features, and these are that have both population density, terrain aspects, and topographical aspects, and also the features that our patients pointed out. So they're also taken into consideration. So for defining the pollution sources, as I said before, by taking the mobile sensor nodes, we took them and the nearest you are from a pollution source, in that case, this is a thrift shop. So the nearest you are from the thrift shop, the highest the pollution is. And here I added a table that shows what are the sources that we found that were most impacting to air pollution. So you can see here that we have recorded 400 microgram per cubic meters for public baths and ovens. I remind you that the average that shouldn't be crossed is 55 for 2.5 and 90 for PM10. And again, open air thrift shops and street food vendors and traffic. So in Europe, for instance, traffic is usually the highest impacting factor of pollution, followed by heating, because they use a lot of heating in their households. While here in Morocco, so we found other sources of pollution. For the modeling part, which is the interesting part, is that we try to take all of these things that we have gathered and put them into a model and build a model that helps us predict air quality. So for that task, we have used 3 machine learning models, a very known one, which is multiple linear regression. It assumes a linear relationship between the explanatory variables and response variables, in our case, of course, pollution. SVR supports vector regression, which is a powerful neural network-based model, which relies on kernel functions to provide the best fits. And a random forest, which is one of the most popular ensemble learning techniques. And it's based on an ensemble of decision trees. So for that, we use that on data for Rabat as a start for Morocco. But I want to say that we used it for only one neighborhood, which is Agdal, because we are still on the process of collecting data, and you already know that we need a lot of data to have very accurate models. Yet only for Agdal, by using these three models, you can see that random forest significantly outperforms both multiple linear regression and support vector regression, with R squares equal to 0.57 for PM10 and 0.63 for PM2.5. So this shows that random forest is way better than the other two, but the main goal is like to show that non-linear models are way better than linear ones when it comes to air quality prediction. So because these like 0.57 and 0.63 are still not very high, not what you would expect from a good model. But it's mainly because it was used for a very small amount of data. So for that reason, we used another data set that is big enough for us to have good predictions. So we used the Air Paris data set, which is an open data set about air quality in Paris. It has measurements of different pollutants such as CO, NO2, PM10, PM2.5, and SO2, and ozone, which I mentioned before. And it has data since the 90s. So you can actually use that data to have very good predictions and to test your models if you are still collecting your own data. So by using this data set, again, I use the same models, like which are multiple linear regression, sports vector machine, and random forest. And now, as you can see, the accuracy is very good for NO2, PM10, and this here for 3 different stations that were used. So another idea that came to our mind is that if you remember the slide that I showed you before, I said that PM10 and PM2.5 actually has particles from black carbon and nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide. So they are actually composed of some other pollutants. That said, a lot of pollutants are actually mixed in the atmosphere and transformed. Because of this idea, we thought of calculating the correlation between these pollutants and make use of it. So for that, because as you can see, PM2.5 is correlated with PM10, NO2 is correlated to CO and to PM10. We decided that we will use this to infer the concentration of some pollutants using those of other pollutants. And we did that because some sensor nodes, the sensor node that we are using is affordable because it calculates PM10 and PM2.5. But for other sensor nodes, for example, to measure NO2 or gases pollutants, they are not only expensive, but also very hard to calibrate. They would easily lose the calibration. So that's why we thought that we should use these pollutants in order to predict other pollutants that we couldn't afford the sensors for. So this thereby will help us reduce the number of air pollution sensors and then reduce the costs, of course. So by applying this idea, these are the results that we have got. So of course, I removed the multiple linear regression model because it was not as good as the nonlinear ones. So I only keep here the nonlinear one, support vector regression and random forest. And as you can see here, this line here shows the accuracy by including only traffic and meteorological features as explanatory variables. While by including other pollutants, so here, for instance, for NO2, we use all the meteorological features, the traffic-related features, and for NO2, we use PM10 and CO as variables as well as features. So by doing that, we have an accuracy that reaches 0.95. And again, for PM10, by including NO2 and CO, we reach 0.92. And for CO, by including NO2 and PM10, we reach 0.95. So these were the results that we got using our machine learning models. So last but not least, another problem that is faced is that the stations that I showed you before in Morocco, or any stations, there is always that problem that everyone faces, which is the loss of data. So in order to manage the loss of data, we have come up with an idea, which is using, so for this diagram here shows that if your sensor is working well, then good. We are good, we can measure pollutants concentrations. However, if it's not, we will go and for the station that is not working, we will select the closest stations to it and the most correlated stations to it, and then predict pollutants for that station that went out of order, and predict pollutants for it, and then store the value. So by doing so, that's how we recognize that, because as you can see, for all pollutants, this is again still a Paris data set. By doing that, like distance and correlation, like the closer you are to a station, the more correlated you are to it. So that was the idea. That's what we thought at the beginning. But then we saw that there are a lot of outliers, and we were trying to understand what is that about. So by doing so, we were able to include in our models, just a normal linear model, the closest stations. Here, as you can see, these are, for example, this is a view of the stations that are in Paris. So, for example, for this station, for example, we will pick the closest stations, and then by computing the correlation with others, we will also pick the most correlated station. So we picked 3 stations, 6 stations, and the 9 stations, and then we tested for all of these 3 categories. So by doing so, this is using distance, and this is doing correlation. This is by using 3 stations. The first line is for three most correlated stations and closest stations, 6 closest station and 6 correlated station, and then 9 closest station and 9 correlated stations. So by doing so, correlation is shown to outperform distance when it comes to selecting candidates that should be used to replace, to predict the station that went off or out of order. So that allowed us to reduce the complexity of the model by minimizing the number of stations used for prediction, reduce the complexity of the model by showing low to no loss in performance. And finally, you can find the data that we have used for Morocco, because it is visualized here. So this is still, we are still working on that, but a lot of things are already available on our website. So you can see here color-coded measurements of pollutants. So you can see that this is very clean, this is very good air quality. And even have more information about what you want to see. So there are different layers, a layer for PM10, layer for PM2.5. and a layer for meteorological data that are also included. Yeah, so that's it. And you can find, of course, much more details about either the making of the sensors or the algorithm used or the data sets, that if you want to use it as well or anything. And I cannot wrap up this presentation without thanking my supervisors, Professor Mounir Rouhou and Professor Abdelatif Koban, and Professor Sophie Pauline, who is from KU Leuven and is part of the MoroccoAI project, and also my colleagues Zinab and Yassine and Shema. So thank you, everyone, and please feel free to ask me if you have any questions. And thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ihsane. This was a very interesting talk, and it's always a pleasure actually to see machine learning techniques applied in like Moroccan related applications. So now it's the time for the Q&A session. So we already have some questions from Zoom, from YouTube. People who are watching us from YouTube, please, if you have any question, there is still time to ask it. Now maybe I'll ask Iman. Iman, are you still with us? If she,
yes, I am here.
Yeah, so we can maybe start reading the questions now.
Okay, thank you, Ihsane, for the great talk and presentation. So I have here some questions from the participants. So Ayman asks you, he wants to know if the targeted versions in Rabat for their acquisition were chosen randomly or based on prior information assumptions.
Yes, that's a good question, and that's actually part of our strategy for MoroccoAI. As I said before, it was a bottom-up approach. We started by seeing patients first, seeing where they come from, what's near them, and we based our study on that. When placing the sensor nodes, we went to where these patients live, some the areas where most patients came from, and then we also choose other areas just to have accurate results later and be able to compare the different neighborhoods in Rabat. But the main goal is to have actually access to the information about the whole city as a first step.
Okay, so the second question is from Umayma Bouaklin. So she asked about how did you compute your scores is based on normalized values?
I'm sorry, on?
On normalized values.
No, I didn't yet for the data set. So I didn't get
the scores, yes, about your model.
To test my model, I used R-square and accuracy. And of course, I did the pre-processing for the data sets, didn't normalize them, but like I did a good pre-processing. So the data was clean and ready to go.
Okay, thank you, Ihsane. And there is the last question is from Mohammed Bourumdan. He is asking why you didn't use deep learning models.
Yes, that's a good question. Actually, because deep learning is a very interesting and the shining star now, but is mainly used when we have complex data sets and there isn't an obvious structure in our data set, which is not really the case here. Like we already know the features that are impacting air pollution. We already know the explanatory variables that we want to use, and we already have a very clear data set. So sometimes deep learning is good indeed, but sometimes simple machine learning models are enough and will do the job greatly. And you can see that they give a good performance.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I do have some questions here also. A question from Abdelhaq Mahmoudi. So how the sensors used in your experiment are different from the ones used to collect the air parif dataset?
I don't know if he was here with us from the beginning, but I showed the monitoring stations in Morocco, the ones I told you would find in the airport, and are the same that are used in Air Paris. So these are the very expensive and huge monitoring stations I was talking about. They are very accurate. They give great and precise measurements, but they are super expensive. Like I said, it's $10,000 at least for a station without the maintenance and everything. So we cannot really afford them here. So the sensors that we have made are way less expensive.
All right, thanks. There's another question from Ayman. Is the dataset going to be publicly released for other Africans or international researchers to use?
Actually, that's the main goal of MoroccoAI, is that we want to put the raw data for public use. So it will be public in our website later. We are just waiting, and it will be raw and like public for use, whether by researchers or just people who are interested and passionate about using machine learning.
All right, so last question from YouTube. So the question is, and it's a broad question actually, if you would like to improve the project as an overall, what would you improve next?
What I'm sorry about the.
Yeah, if you'd like to improve the project as an overall, so what's the next step you would improve?
The project hasn't finished yet. It's still ongoing, and we are still thinking about including many things. We would like, actually, if we had the opportunity and more time, we would love to include medical stuff, like a health part, a very big health part, because you already know that pollution does not only impact the respiratory system, but has also been linked to cognitive abilities among children. And if we have if we could have more time and more energy for that, then we would definitely improve a lot of things and add a lot of things.
Right, thanks a lot. So I think maybe we can take one last question, because I see a lot of questions, but we unfortunately don't have a lot of time to take them all. So just a last question about tuning the ML models, tuning your machine learning techniques, like for example, random forest or SVR, etc. Did you do like some hyperparameter search or something to like tune your parameters?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question quite well.
Yeah, actually, it's about like tuning your ML models. I mean, for example, if there are like some hyperparameters for your SVR, for example, algorithm like the constant C or something, did you like tweak a little bit the method, or just use that as standard, as is it given, for example, by sklearn? Or...
Yes, I just used the traditional way. Didn't really go into. I didn't really need any tuning. Maybe we will be needing it though for the brute data that we are getting from Morocco, because it's not as organized, as clean as the one from Paris. So maybe we would need that later.
Right. Thanks a lot, Ihsane. So before moving to the break sessions, I would like to send a message for our dear participants from YouTube, because we hope that you found the talk interesting. Thanks a lot for your time, and see you next time. So now I'll just stop the